Hi, I'm Pete and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. In this video we're going to finish kind of major component disassembly for this Farmall Super C. All I got left here is the transmission final drive and rear axles. I know I got to take off the brake housing and look at the brakes, take off the PTO and take off the axles to get at the seals, but how far we're going to go into the transmission final drive to check bearings remains to be seen. We'll figure it out in this video. First thing I'm going to do is take these brakes apart. These are double disc brakes. I'll show you how they work when I get them apart. We want to get them apart to look at the brakes because they're kind of sticky, spotty, whatever. And we want to look at the pinion seals inside to see if they're leaking. I've been in here before to replace the disc, but that was 10 or 15 years ago. Alrighty. This is one of the brake discs here. Just like disc brakes on a car. Well, at least these look kind of like them, but they work completely differently. We'll take the other one off. Now, as I said, these disc brakes don't work like the disc brakes on your car. So here's the inside. And you've actually got one disc, braking disc, and then you've got this expanding assembly in the middle. I got to get it out here. There we go. So this is kind of the heart of it here. You got one disc on this side of it and one disc on this side of it. The other disc is right here. So this is the way it looks in there with the two discs. And then in between here, you've got what's called a ball ramp expanding brake system. So as these two turn against each other, when you push in the brake, it pulls on this lever, and see how one disc spins against the other? Well, as it spins, the whole thing expands. And the reason that it expands is because these balls here run up these ramps, and so they poke out further. And as it expands, of course, these discs get tight against the wear surface on, or the, whatever you want to call it here, and that's what stops it. There's a braking surface here, there's a braking surface here, there's a braking surface here, and there's a braking surface back on the tractor. So in theory, when you add up all those braking surfaces, you'd think, wow, these brakes work so much better than the old band brakes, which rode around drums. In practice, they really don't. These things are really fussy. The discs have a tendency to glaze up. You can see what everything looks like in this. I rebuilt these with new springs, new balls, fixed the ramps, put in new discs a while back, and well, 10, 15 years ago, and they worked great for a while, and now they need to be gone through again. They require a lot more maintenance than the band brakes do. Oh, and there's one other thing I want to mention. You know, in the old days, they used to turn rotors down on disc brakes to smooth the surface, and this would be the equivalent surface to a rotor. That can be done on these too, but one of the problems you run into with old brakes that have been turned is this distance, this total distance gets to be too much. So actually this has to be taken down, and there's a spec for it as to what the working distance should be, so that this assembly doesn't have to expand too far to hit the braking surface here. So I'm going to label these with what side they came off of. That one was left, and store them away for rebuilding, or at least cleaning up. I think that's really all they need later on. The other thing is I got quite a bit of play here on this pinion bearing. Quite surprising how much there is, and it's the same on both sides. Here's the other side. This is the right side. Lots of wiggle in there, and you can see it inside the differential too. See how the gear kind of wiggles back and forth? That tells me maybe it's both bearings. Alright, let's move on to the belt, pulley, and power takeoff. Got this weird combination thing here. You saw on the A's and the B's and the C's and the Super C's. Oh, there was some oil in there. Here's the unit. This is the drive shaft that comes out the back of the counter shaft in the transmission. When you engage, well, let me pull the lever here, or push the lever. When you engage it, it pushes these splines into the counter shaft, into the end of it, and then you get spinach. Otherwise, it's just idling inside a bushing inside the counter shaft of the shaft. You know what I mean. And then there's a bunch of gears in here that get powered where they need to go. To the PTO, which is down here, and the belt pulley, which is down here. This tractor never had a belt pulley on it since I've owned it. Just this blank off here, or this sleeve. If I take you down into the final drive here, you can see on the top, actually it's not the counter shaft is the lower shaft because it spins opposite the engine. This is called the spline shaft, the top shaft, and this has got the sliding gears on it. But anyway, the belt pulley, jeez. The belt pulley drives up the spline shaft, and these are the splines that the end of that sleeve that I showed you engages into, and then that's the bushing inside, a kind of pilot bushing where the shaft rides when it's idling and when it's engaged. That's the deal with that. The next job is to remove the rear axles, and they call this the axle carrier, and this is the axle itself. It's just bolted on here, but before you can pull it out, you have to go into the final drive case here. Here's the bull gear, and you've got to detach these, take that off, and then you can pull the whole assembly out. Okie dokie. Well, that won't work. I just put a chisel in there. It won't hurt the gear. It's not like it's going to take a lot to loosen these bolts. Now we can pull these rear axles, and I'm just going to rig up a chain to help hold it up. I'm going to have to keep a hand on it, but this will take most of the weight. We'll take these nuts off. These are fastened with studs, but in this case the whole stud came out. That's okay. With a little wiggling, this should come loose. It's got to come out of the bull gear. There we go. And now the other one. Here's a little trick to get a stuck nut out of socket. Just thread it on a little bit, pull it off, and there you go. And off you go. Don't do that. Leak on the floor like that. These axles out now, I keep track of which side they go on. Sometimes the casting is the same for either side. I don't know if it is in this case, but everything's meant to mesh together and is worn in a certain way, so I keep track of them. Next we'll take this front knuckle off, and I locked it in 2 gears so nothing will rotate, so I can turn this loose. It's just a single bolt in the center. Do you need a little persuasion? Why are you so sticky? I don't know. You shouldn't be that way. Well, let's go to plan B. Take this seal and bearing retainer off and pull them all out at the same time. I guess she just takes a little patience. She's coming out slowly. Almost there. There. I guess she was just really tight. I don't see any damage on there. Now, this is really common on Farmalls. This is the front bearing retainer that went on first onto here, and there's the lip seal in there. And then you've got the shaft that lip seal rides on. There's definitely not a tight fit now. That seal's pretty worn. But you always look at these shafts and see, because grime getting in there over the course of decades will wear a groove onto this steel. This one is super, really good. There is no groove whatsoever, so that's good. Let's take a look at this input bearing. Yeah, see that? That's either the balls or the races are worn that it's got that much end play in it. Yeah, and we got some up and down too. That's quite worn. Take this key off. chisel screwdriver. They're the same thing, aren't they? There we go. You're a big key. Given how worn this input shaft bearing was, spline shaft, whatever you want to call it, definitely want to take this cover off and see how this bearing is. Now if we look at this bearing, you know, I get no movement in there. Let me unlock the transmission here so we can spin it. That one's nice and tight if you compare it to that one where I've got in and out. No question that's got to be replaced. Oh yeah, I forgot about this cross shaft that connects the brakes and the clutch and everything. That just slides right out. Make sure you get all the keys off of it and then it just comes. There's a washer on each side to help center it, and then the seal is right there. I've torn this down far enough to get a general idea of how much wear's on it. So in other words, if somebody had been in it and put new bearings in it right before I bought it, it'd be a lot different than this. I got a lot of wear on this input bearing here. I've got a lot of wear on both of the bolt pinion bearings. The shafts wobble on both ends, even in the differential and also on the outside. And at this point, all I need to do to gut this transmission is pull the differential and pull the two shafts that are in here, and I'm done. I have all the bearings out. Now, you may say, well, just leave well enough alone, right? I mean, it ran fine when it started, but remember, I'm restoring this so that I never have to mess with it again in my lifetime. Hopefully. You never know what'll come up, but to put all this work into this and not just do these final few steps, that's nuts. You know, just like the engine, I'm not using a half or three-quarter tired transmission in a restored tractor. I've seen too many where they just strip them down, paint them, build them back up, and that's it. That's not the way I play. So let's get to work. We could pull one of the bull gears, the left one here. The right one's stuck with this oil tube, so we'll leave that for now. I keep track of which side these go in because they've worn into the axle and the differential pinions, so we want to keep them the same. In contrast to the H's and M's, pulling the differential is actually pretty easy on these. You just loosen up this plate, take it off. It's even got little chisel recesses in it so that you can have something to purchase on with a chisel. Then you just have to kind of work it side to side. Must be I replaced this seal. It's a new seal. I must have done that when I did the brakes first time around. And then you've got an O-ring in here, which I probably replaced too, that makes the outer seal. And then this pinion shaft just slides right out of the differential. This goes right into the differential and seats in there, this spline shaft. And then this is the pinion that drives the bull gears. And we've got the outer bearing right here. Pull the other side off. Yeah, I did do the seals. Now we got to take these housings off that are on either side of the differential case, which is just in the middle here. And in order to get those off, you undo these bolts here and then the whole case pulls out. And you have to do the left one here first so that you can pull the differential this way and then get this bull gear out before you pull the other one. And we got shims behind here, so you got to be careful of them. You don't want to be wrinkling them up, and you got to keep track of where they go. Oh, interesting. There's the shims that locate the differential side to side in the proper location. We keep those on there, keep track of them. But look at this. I'll show you. Let me just pull this differential out. For the inner bearing on the both pinion shafts, we've got tapered roller bearings here. So, of course, the advantage to a tapered roller bearing is you can seat it and take up any wear on it by how far in that race goes that I just showed you off of the holder. Interesting. Now the question is, do I have enough wiggle room to take out this bull gear? It appears no. In order to get this bull gear out, it appears that I got to remove this tube that supplies oil to the PTO, and to do that, I see on the back here, it looks like somebody's driven on these before. I wonder if this is threaded. We'll see. There we go. There's that tube. Then we can lift the right bull gear out, take the carrier off the right side, and out she comes. Notice there's a big O-ring outside this one, and what was happening is this big O-ring was leaking and causing the leak. I had replaced the seal in the inner O-ring, and the brake, it wasn't leaking into the brakes, but it's leaking down here at the case. So we got to replace that. Next we could pull the transmission shafts, the spline shaft and the counter shaft. And kind of unique to these, there's a rivet going through the reverse gear here that I need to remove, and then the whole shaft slides out the back and the gears stay in here and you just pull the gears out. So I'm going to cut that rivet off. And to do that, I've got a hacksaw blade with some tape on the end of it, and we'll just cut right through it. Just lock the transmission up so it won't turn. There we go. Just pop the end of it off, maybe. Let's move this and turn it. And then we can drive it out the other end. You're kind of a pain. I would say you're, right up there with other pains of taking things apart. There we go. Now we can bump this out the back. Hopefully. Well, we need to do some more bumping. Now we start pulling these gears off. Well, you know, you're supposed to come out. There you go. That's one way to do it. This is the rear of that shaft, and this is where the belt pulley and PTO shaft engages, and that's that pilot bushing that the shaft rides in. We'll put these guys back on here in reverse order for safekeeping. You can see this is 70 years of grinding the gears a little bit when you're putting it into gear. It wears these down. This is the side that the gear slides into. I can't remember which way these go, so we'll just stick them on here this way. We'll figure it out later. And now all we got in here is the counter shaft, and then we've got the reverse idler, which moves back and forth to engage that larger gear. And this one comes out just like the top shaft did. You just bump it out the back, and as you're bumping or pulling, this one's sliding more easily, you just pull the gears off one by one. Even though they call it the counter shaft and the spline shaft, this is a spline shaft too. Spacer. There's the shaft, and then this is the pinion for the differential, also known as the bevel gear. It's raining out there. That's what you hear in the background. I've got the garage door open. There's a bearing in the back here on the lower shaft that didn't come out with the shaft. So I found a socket that's the same as the outer race size and put an extension on it, and that way I can bump it out. I think it's going to take more than a bump, but I got to get it out of here because I'm going to wash out the case. There she moved. Once she moves, This is an interesting bearing. It's a roller bearing, but it's a flat bearing. It's not tapered. See the... Oh, Fred, will you go away? See, the inner race on the bearing can come out either end, which tells me that it's not tapered at all. It's a flat bearing, but it's a roller bearing. And the advantage of roller bearing over ball bearing is you've got more strength because you've got the surface of a roller on the race instead of just the point or the kind of little bit that a ball in a race does. Very interesting. You know, this was the problem they had with the 560 series when, you know, got a terrible rap and they had to go back in the final drives and replace some of the ball bearings with roller bearings so they could get more strength into the rear end and heavy pulling. This bearing appears to be fine. I'll bet it costs a fortune. I'm kind of glad about that. Interestingly, all the other bearings that I've pulled out were IHC bearings, International Harvester Corporation. This one, made in USA, it's a Hyatt bearing, and I wonder if IH outsourced these because they weren't in the roller bearing business as much as ball bearings. I have no idea. Maybe it's been replaced too. The last thing that's got to come out of the inside of this transmission is the reverse idler. And to do that, we just loosen up this set screw or bolt that locks the shaft in. And it pops right out like this. And there's a bushing in here. And the last thing to do on the outside of the case is pop these seals out where the brake and clutch cross shaft went through. We all know how fun it is to get seals out. Sometimes. Well, you just come out of there. You know, listen, we had this discussion, right? I know we did. That you were going to give me an easy time of it, and you're not. You went back on your word. I'm going to have to tear you apart instead. You know I just took out your mate, right? You do not have a chance. You might as well just give up now. Here's the empty case. Inside, here's the axles and associated bull gears. I keep them, you know, aligned by side. And I'd love to say that I organized all this transmission final drive gear sets, but they're just kind of scattered all over the place. For those wondering, how the heck does he remember where everything goes? I remember where a fair amount of it goes because every piece is unique. I label the nuts and bolts and hardware and put them in plastic baggies and label where they're going, but there's two references that I use mainly when I'm doing this work. First is the INT manual, stands for Implement and Tractor Manual, and these manuals are in mechanics speak. They're really terse, you know, they just have the bare minimum for you to know which way a shaft slides out or what the order of removal is. So there's that. And then I use a parts manual, and these are very handy for when you're putting things back together. Let me get to the transmission sheet here. So when it comes to those gears that are laying all on the table in a mess, I've got a nice exploded diagram here which shows me the order of putting them back together. So I can keep my head in a book, so to speak, you know? I mean, I don't need to remember every single little detail. And I also get the part numbers for bearings and seals that I'm looking for out of here for when I call the parts suppliers. And I am glad that I stripped this right down to the very end. From the point that I decided to go and take out all of the guts of this, it took me less than an hour to do it, and it leaves me with a nice bare case that I can put on the hang from the bucket loader outside, pressure wash down and clean it out. So much easier doing it now than in the cold weather when I would have to hang it in here and use solvent to kind of wash it down. I can just blast it all out with a pressure washer and then oil the areas that I'm worried about rusting. So what's the next step? That's the next step. I got to take some things apart and assess the health of the other bearings that I didn't look at, and then I'll make up an order to buy bearings and seals for this to begin with. And this is where we're going to start building back up kind of in reverse order. And when I take this out to pressure wash it off, I'm also going to take the other big parts out. I'll take out the torque tube clutch housing and blast that out, and I'll take out the touch control unit and blast that out and grind the surfaces off here. before I put it all back together, and it's so much nicer when it's warm out. I'm thinking of doing farm work in the winter and mechanic work in the summer. How does that sound? What would I raise though? Polar bears? I don't know. Penguins? Anyway, that's what we'll do. And we're going to start building it back up. I probably won't show the cleaning on camera because it's just cleaning. It's pretty boring, pressure washing and degreasing. But when I start building this back up, we'll be back at it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm loving this project so far. It's really stress-free, I would say, compared to the MD. I'll see you next time.